folks, welcome to the Rebel's Edge. Today we're going to talk about Palantir, a company that has exploded to the upside on its success as well as artificial intelligence. That and Toby Keith on the Rebel's Edge. Bang! Well, here we are, Pete, back with another Rebel's Edge. There you see it, folks, February 6th, and he is Pete Najarian. I'm Jon Najarian. Jared is handling all of the graphics, the sound, everything else, and kind of a sad day, though, Pete, because not that you didn't see it coming. He announced back in 2021, he being Toby Keith, that he had stomach cancer. And he gutted it through with all of the chemo and the surgeries to cut out parts of, his body that were affected by it. But, they couldn't get enough of it quick enough, I guess, Pete. And so Toby Keith passed away. And they announced that today. I don't know if it was late last night, Pete, or early this morning, but they said he passed away peacefully. And so more or less, folks, that's going to be our macro minute for today. We're going to basically, tip a hat to Toby and his family, his fans. What a great performer. Obviously, he had more or less 2 or 3 careers, Pete, in music, because he was famous long before, 9/11, but then became really, really famous after 9/11. And, you had actually met him on a number of occasions and hung out with him, right?
Yeah, big dude, great guy, cowboy. I mean, he's from Clinton, Oklahoma, John, and he. The only reason I even had an opportunity ever to even bump into him is because of Bobby Stoops, the coach down there at Oklahoma. Great guy. Both, he's coached with his brothers and all the rest of that. Anyway, they were good friends and neighbors, and so. Toby, what a cool guy. What a cool career, John. I mean, a guy who worked on the oil rigs, which is not easy work. We all know that. And
Red Solo Cup.
He was with the Easy Money band, so he always had music into him. And it was just he and a bunch of other guys just hanging out, having a great time. And, then he did semi-pro football. And anybody who's never stood next to Toby Keith, he's a big dude. He actually was a very big dude. He was a good, solid 6'4", and maybe call it 250 or whatever. But he was a big man with a big heart, great guy, and had a great career. And it's really sad to hear about this whole thing, because I had heard through the grapevine of friends and everybody else, including Bobby and some of these guys, that he was doing okay. He was actually showing some of the improvements that you'd want to have, as you're battling something like this, stomach cancer. And, but he just, I think he was at peace with it, but he definitely struggled, I think, in those final few months, John. So, sometimes this is almost a gift because it can be so brutal. But, talk about the guy who, you want to talk about somebody who absolutely is a true American. This guy on his own dime was going all over to Afghanistan and everywhere else. And after post 9/11, he was entertaining troops everywhere. And they loved it because he would show up and do his thing and bring stuff with him and all the rest of that. And, you want to talk about a true American doing the right thing. And there's a guy in Toby Keith. So we don't have enough of them. We lost him. And hopefully there's others out there someday that'll be able to step in. Those are big shoes or boots, but it was really the guy's a special guy. Even if you don't like country music, if you like something completely different, put on a couple of his songs. It'll put a smile on your face, and you will you'll enjoy them because the words are pretty great.
Yeah, and I heard a tribute, Pete, on The Highway, which is of course a Sirius XM channel 56 that I listen to every day.
Sure.
And the tributes were great. But one of the best ones was from a National Guardsman from Oklahoma that said he was over in Afghanistan and Toby was over there, but he wasn't going to come by their group because it was too small. But then he insisted. He said, "No, I'm seeing those guys."
How great is that?
Yeah. Quite a guy. Wow. We're going to miss him.
Yep.
Well, let's dive in, Pete, to fantastic futures.
Fantastic futures.
Well, fantastic futures, man, just came across the screen. And this is one, Pete, that you've talked about a lot. Nat gas, I'm going to say, because yesterday it was down 8%. That's a big drop. That was the front month contract. And by the way, folks, natural gas is $1 million contract. So when you're talking about nat gas, this is something that, you don't see a lot of little speculative paper in. It's so big that it could really hurt if you're on the wrong side of it, because 8% of $1 million, folks, 80 grand.
Yeah.
That's a big move on one contract. So you need to be aware that it's down again today, and it plumbed lower and lower pretty much throughout the session, Pete.
Yeah, to your point, John, I think it's really important to understand that we've been talking about this for a while. We've been talking about how it can't get its legs underneath it. It starts to make those moves to the upside, very much like crude, and then it just sort of fails. But this has been an even bigger failure, and we are looking at levels now, John, where do we go sub 2? I wouldn't be shocked at this point, because we're almost right there now. And so another move, even just a little bit further to the downside, it certainly could happen. It's been getting whacked. I think the other thing that we should always focus on as well, outside of energy and so forth, is just taking a look at the 10-year. It's getting a little bit closer to that 4%. Had that big spike up after it was back in the 380s, back over 4.1 and change. It's pulling back just a little bit here and there. Not a lot, but it's something that we definitely ought to keep our eye on as well.
Yeah. And obviously instant power generation, nat gas. If people have a cold spell, nat gas. But the fact that it's moving down like this tells you we don't have either of those two demands pushing it higher right now. Instead, just the reverse. All right, Palantir, Pete. This one, all they did was put up a nice number, a profit. First time they ever put up a profit was 3 or 4 quarters ago, Pete. But this one pumped to the upside, and the profit was triple that first profit that they ever posted up. And, it's artificial intelligence, it's data analytics. Palantir is one of those companies that you got to keep your eye on. And it is certainly riding the wave, Pete. It's higher by some 25, 26% so far today. And you know what, folks? We had unusual activity in it. That's right, because we just days ago had big buying of calls. There you see it. Two separate ones. One's all the way out in July. The other one was more short-term. And they were betting pretty big. They only put up 18 cents, Pete. So that means, folks, since every option's for 100 shares, that 18 cents is $18. So for $180, you'd control 1,000 shares of this. So for $180, you turned it into as much as $1,200 overnight. You can imagine what 100 lot would do, or 1,000 lot. And when you look at that unusual activity, they weren't playing around. They were buying big contracts, Pete.
It's why we're there. It's why we trade the option side of things, John. We do stocks as well, just so everybody's fully aware. But, the options give you so many different ways to try to approach a trade and do it with leverage and everything else. And when you get a hit like this, it tends to be a pretty nice hit. But, John, when you look at the profits, like you said, it took them a long time to get there. Now that they've gotten there, now they're just setting records. And it's going to be something that I don't understand why it would even slow down anytime soon. I'm looking at this stock, and I can tell you this, John, even today, we have follow-up option paper again, looking for even greater moves to the upside, some of them going out to March, but looking for a pretty substantial move to the upside once again. By the way, first 90 minutes or so, 217 million shares trading, and the average for a full day has been about 15 million, which isn't a bad number in itself. So a lot of turnover, a lot of folks very, very interested in this one from a trade. By the way, there's some shorts out there that are feeling the squeeze squeeze today, John, because this thing is making one of those kind of moves. And when you look at the balance sheet, you look specifically at the cash they've got, 3.6 million or billion, not so bad. So I think they're in position for something even greater to the upside. I don't know that even on this big move that they're done, at least in the near term.
Yeah, it's certainly rewarding a lot of the people who really bet on it big. By the way, that it does include Elon Musk. I don't believe he's involved with the company anymore, but I do believe he's still a significant shareholder. And he was one of the first people in there with Peter Thiel and so forth. So big news out of Palantir today. All right, Coherent, Pete. This one moving to the upside as well. Coherent up 16% right now. Really strong report out of these guys. 6 million share turnover versus normal like 1.7 million shares in a full day. So obviously 2 or 3 times pushing towards maybe even 5 or 6 times by the end of the day, depending how much more paper we see. It's an $8 billion company, Pete. The earnings highlights were pretty darn spectacular. And they anticipate revenue growth throughout 2024. That's why it's just moving to the upside strong throughout the session.
Yep, they beat the expectations, John. They were a little off from the year ago, but they beat the expectations that were out there. They also beat on 2 of the 3 biggest revenue drivers, though a really good report to your point. And is it done? I'm not so sure. It's hitting 52-week highs today, but that doesn't mean anything about putting a cap on this stock. I think there's something where, with what you're saying about 2024 and the possibilities of it being a pretty strong year, this definitely has a little bit more room to the upside. Now, it's one of those where they do have some significant debt, so I think that's something that you've got to be aware of, but massive volumes again, and we've been talking about this. There are a lot of names out there, John, that are hitting 52-week highs that aren't part of the Magnificent Seven, and this is just another one. And we'll probably be talking about another one in the next stock that we're breaking down.
Yeah, as Pete says, folks, and I have talked about the Magnificent Seven too, but I don't do it saying that really they're the only thing driving the market, because that is just not true. You look at a stock like Coherent, you look at a stock like, well, let's talk about it, Pete, Spotify.
Right.
Spotify explodes to the upside today on their earnings report. They also moved all the way up to a new 52-week high, if not all-time high, $248, $249 a share. Came off of that pretty fast. So that was just in the first, what Pete and I refer to as amateur hour, where if you're lucky enough to ride a trade like this, folks, you need to take your profits quick when it opens up and gaps up like that and then extends a little further. The greater fool theory is, that there's 2 born every minute and 1 to take them. Somebody is going to overstay their welcome, and they certainly did in this one, because it came off almost $20 from the highs of the day very quickly. Still higher on the session, but a lot of those profits vaporized as it reversed course.
Yeah, 52-week highs is right, John. As far as all-time highs, actually back in 21, believe it or not, and it's probably because of everything going on at that point in time and the pandemics and everything else that we were also concerned about. It did get up over 300, but nonetheless up significantly today, like we talk about 52-week highs. The thing that I think definitely helped them, John, you look at the monthly active users, that was up pretty significantly, 23%. I'd say that's pretty significant. And the premium customers as well, up about 13%. So, Spotify is doing a lot of moving around and trying to figure out ways to be a little bit more efficient with their money as well. But they certainly have everybody very, very excited about what they've been able to accomplish so far. So I think it's something where, you look at music streaming. Is this thing going to keep on going? Probably for a little while longer. And I think that they've just got to be a little bit more efficient, which is exactly what their guidance sounded like. They're going to try to maneuver themselves into better positioning in terms of some of the pricing that they're doing and so forth. All that being said, this is a company that had a really, really great opening. And to your point, John, discipline dictates action. What does that mean? It means when you get a stock like this and it makes the kind of leap up like it did, it might not be such a bad idea to take a little bit of profits off the table. Even if it continues to the upside, you'll feel okay about it, believe me, because sometimes you've just got to take a little off the table and wait for the next opportunity. And maybe the next opportunity will take a little while.
Yeah. Well, this is a perfect example of exactly what Pete just described, folks. And that's Symbiot. We have talked about this one before. We've had unusual activity. Not this time, not into these earnings, but SYM just hammering to the downside, Pete. And it's a situation where the stock was up over 230% year over year. For the most part, even if you have AI or artificial intelligence as one of the levers that you can pull, you're not going to see stocks up 230% and just keep ripping. Is it over? Probably not. But are they due for corrections? Because again, trees don't grow to the sky. And the answer is yes. And that's just what it's doing today, Pete. It's correcting. If you're a long-term holder, hopefully you'd written some calls against it or something. But if you didn't, I wouldn't sell it. I think this stock still is going to do very well, but you're going to have to deal with some of these pullbacks. And today's is a double-digit pullback.
Yeah, ugly pullback for sure, John. When you look at some of the different things, one of the biggest criticisms that people had was they looked at the revenue, and it's not that it missed, but they were just disappointed that it basically just hit about what the expectations were. I'm not sure that I always agree with that whole thing, but nonetheless, that is the direction we're going, and people are definitely punching this thing in the face right now. It's been pretty ugly. The operating cash flow is something that definitely stood out as well. People were a little bit concerned about that. They reported that it was negative. So that is something that I think certainly people were taking note of, but they are hammering this thing, John. And to your point, maybe there's going to be an opportunity there. I will say this. When you're looking at shorts, and I look at the short float, there's the outstanding, there's the short float and all the rest of it. About 43% short, John. So somebody out there is feeling pretty damn good about how they positioned into this thing. But at some point, they're going to probably be looking to say, hey, maybe it's time to cover a little bit of this thing. And then we will maybe see that move that kind of finally hits a bottom and starts to move to the upside if some of these shorts actually get off of this thing and actually start buying some of that stock.
Yeah, it's I think it's got a bright future, Pete. Automation and using AI to make that automation work better for you. Yeah, that's a great thing. And it's going to result in bigger profits long term because they won't have as many costs. So this is one that Symbiot would be, or Symbotic, I guess it's pronounced, is one that I would hold on to. But again, you're going to have those ups and downs. All right, Pete, tell us a little bit about what you got now for Pete's Red Zone Sports.
All right. Well, you can see it up there on the panel, gambling. Remember when the NFL thought that was the worst thing under God's green earth, John? Get these guys away from that. We're not doing gambling. Everybody else in the other sports was kind of, up and down on this whole thing. And now all of a sudden we've got a team in Las Vegas for the NFL. We got a hockey team out there. We're getting a baseball team out there. I mean, they've taken care of business, John. The old Oakland A's will be out there once that stadium is ready and everything else. But the NFL and gambling, I've got 23.1 billion reasons why they're excited about the gambling, John. That's the amount of money expected for the Super Bowl, just the Super Bowl in terms of gambling. So I thought it would be kind of fun to take a look at this, though, John. 2021, the NFL, when they finally loosened it up a little bit, 21 billion for the season. Now these guys are doing 23 billion for the Super Bowl. I mean, it gives you a little bit of an idea of how they embraced it, the growth that we are seeing. But I thought it might be kind of fun. Let's talk about some prop bets. Now, there's a lot of different ones out there. Everybody can pick their own. But you and I were talking earlier, Travis Kelce. He is the most active prop bet guy out there. I wonder why.
I wonder why.
He's a great tight end. We'll give him that.
Yes.
And last week I think he had 11 catches, John. Not so bad. Did pretty well. Seems like Mahomes was able to find him pretty well there. But obviously the Taylor Swift effect, we all know it's going to be there. Anybody watch the Grammys? I'm just surprised he wasn't there at the Grammys with her, John. but anyway, one of those kind of things. But there is just so much going on when it comes to the prop bets. I had mine. I'll ask you what you've got. My prop bet would be this, because I kind of like it every year. How long will the national anthem be? All these other ones, there's so many that are not necessarily football, but there's so many other ones that are just ridiculous, right? Like Travis Kelce's first catch, will it be 10 yards? All these crazy things that they come up with. It's kind of fun. I'm just going to go with the old, hey, look, is somebody going to get out there and try to stretch the national anthem out there about 3.5 minutes so they can really get their shot in there? So I'd go over no matter what it is, because the ego tells me most everybody is going to go over. I don't even care who's singing it. They're going over.
Well, as you know, Pete, I have a love-hate relationship with Travis Kelce because last year I had a parlay with the Chiefs and Travis Kelce getting over 7 catches. So he needed 8, obviously. This year it's 7.5 again, Pete. So I figured, okay, he'll get over 7 catches and he'll score the first touchdown, I think it was, as well as on that parlay. I think the parlay, Pete, would have paid me like 30 grand. And I am all but ready to cash that ticket when all of a sudden at the end of the game, and I figure, okay, they need this drive. Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs need this drive to finish it out and win the game against Philly. Okay, because you'll recall that in the first half, Philly was pretty dominant. Yeah. So at the end of the game, they, with the clock running down, all of a sudden Mahomes takes off, and instead of throwing the ball to Kelce, which would have been his 8th catch and would have paid me because I had the other 2 parts right, instead he runs, and now because he made like a 22 or 25-yard run for a first down, now he's not going to throw the ball to Travis Kelce, obviously, because they're just setting up in front of the goalposts. And I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe that.
So close.
Yeah. So I'm not a big fan of the prop bets anymore. I still like Travis, so I might bet that, but I'm not going to parlay it, Pete. But I am going to take San Francisco, not Kansas City, to win. And I'll probably take Travis Kelce over the 7.5 catches that right now that's the betting line.
Hey, by the way, were we going to watch a little Purdy? Is Purdy out?
Oh yeah, yeah. Let's take a look at how Purdy punked his family. This is pretty funny, folks. Take a watch and a listen.
This is John Lynch.
Hey, buddy, this is John Lynch from the 49ers.
We're going to take you.
I'm sorry it took till the end. We find you very relevant, but you are going to be Mr. Irrelevant.
That was in my parents' room. I come walking out into the living room, and everyone's waiting. It's another free agency call, and they're like, no way, you're lying. I said, I'm trying to act all sad in the chair, and then...
The kid has just got ice in his veins, John. He really, not on the field, off the field.
262nd.
How great is that? Oh, that's awesome.
It is.
What a great feeling. What a cool thing that is for them.
And then, Pete,
John Lynch was like, hey, Brock.
Once he went there to the 49ers, it didn't take Shanahan more than just a couple practices to say, you know what, Lynch, we might want to deal with Trey Lance because this guy's better. And you could imagine that conversation, Pete, with John Lynch saying, are you telling me we traded all this and paid him all this money, and the guy that was the end of the draft, Mr. Irrelevant, is better? And Shanahan said, yeah.
That had to be a tough conversation. But you know what? John Lynch deserves all the credit in the world because a lot of guys' egos wouldn't have allowed that whole thing, right? They would have just said, look, we got Lance. We did all this. We're going to have to do that. And you know what? He didn't do it. And now Lance isn't even there. Lance is down in Dallas, right? I mean, so Interesting times, John. Interesting times. By the way, for those who don't know this, Trey Lance grew up right down there, about 90 miles. So Minnesota boy, Marshall, Minnesota. Good kid. All right, John, number 2. We're going to do on the March Madness. I mean, you and I know basketball inside and out. We love it. And we're going to do wait a minute. It is March Madness, but we're not doing basketball. We're going to do a little football. Why is it March Madness? Well, because on March 13th, free agency begins, and there are 2 quarterbacks that probably sit at the very top of this whole thing, John. You got Kirk Cousins. Where does he go? And is he deserving? Yes, he had that issue last year, the injury, but before that, he was leading the NFL. He was one of those quarterbacks that no one ever likes him. I know a little fella out there in New York who doesn't like him. Well, they're having to eat a little crow because he's had some good years, John. He's done a really great job for the team, for the Minnesota Vikings. And without him, they struggled and had a really, really difficult year because of it and could not find the right fit. So do they pay him? Can they pay him? It's a tough one. So here's where I think his landing spots look like they're going to be. And I'll give you where I think he lands. And then you tell me. You've got Atlanta. They got all the money in the world. They just don't have a quarterback. They haven't been able to figure out their quarterback position for a while now. You got the Pittsburgh Steelers, which are probably a quarterback away from being a team that could be very relevant in the playoffs in the AFC, in my opinion. Then you've got Las Vegas, because Lord knows Garoppolo ain't the guy, and O'Connell's probably not the guy, at least not yet. So maybe you bring in a Kirk Cousins to be the quarterback, to add to that defense that they've got that's gotten better and better and better. That might be a pretty interesting spot, because I just don't see the Vikings pulling the trigger, John, giving him probably $45 million. They just can't do it because they got too many holes right now. But somebody out there's got room, and maybe it's Atlanta.
I bet it is Atlanta, Pete. I got to believe that Blank, the owner, is kind of tired of them not doing so well, and he's got a huge stadium to fill up. That if he does, and it's like one of those 88,000 person stadiums, Pete, he can make a lot of money. Obviously, NFL doesn't share live gate; that goes all to the home team. So if you have 88,000 people in your stadium and somebody else you're playing puts 65,000 or whatever in their stadium, you got a little bit of an edge for those 10 games, including preseason, that you're going to play there. I will say this, Pete, rather than estimating quarterback, I'm going to say, which one of these 2 wide receivers would you take? Calvin Ridley from the Jacksonville Jaguars. All he had were 76 receptions and 1,000 yards, Pete. But because he plays for the Jaguars, nobody outside of Jacksonville hears of this guy at all. But that is a wide receiver that's a game changer, I think, potentially for whomever might draft him. And then Evans from Tampa Bay. Yeah. For years, he's been one of the top receivers. He's going to break the bank with, this contract, I think. He's older, but this guy, all he does is, just catch the ball, and he's a big target. So I think those 2 guys, for whatever team needs wide receivers, those 2 guys are 2 of the best out there. I'd look for their names to be in the headlines once free agency starts.
I would too, John. The only problem, and you already mentioned it, is the fact of his age. And it's something that comes up with running backs a lot of the time, but receiver as well. But he is big. He's been great. He's been outstanding for Tampa. I mean, Tom Brady loved him. And I'll tell you who else loved him. Baker Mayfield. He kind of thought this guy was a pretty good target. As a matter of fact, he had a pretty big year. How about this? 1,200 yards last year with 13 touchdowns, John. So you've got a big target who's kind of like a hybrid tight end wide receiver in terms of his size, but he's got the speed still. So, it's a tough one. I don't know. If I had a gun to my head, I think the only reason I'd go with Ridley would be age, but that would probably be too much of a bias on that. So I think as far as talent, what he could do in the next 2 years, I'd probably go with Evans. So it would depend on what kind of a team I've got. Are we kind of rebuilding, or are we going for it right now? And if you're going for it right now, I think I'd go with Evans. But that brings me right over to the other quarterback, Baker Mayfield. Where does he go, John? You know how much he got paid last year? He got way overpaid. He goes to Tampa for $4 million. All these other guys are getting $40 million, right? $30 million, whatever they are per year, $52 million, $57 million. Well, Baker Mayfield was getting $4 million a year, which is nothing. So he will get paid. Why is that? Because he played really, really well. And for a guy who was the former number one pick, Cleveland Browns, he has found himself, John. Now, I wonder, should he stay, though, in Tampa? That's a possibility. If he doesn't stay there, and they're going to pay him, whoever gets him will have to pay him. He won't get huge money, but he's going to get money because he proved that he can do it in the NFL. And I think it's, size-wise, kind of Brock Purdy-ish, kind of size or whatever. So you probably feel pretty good about that. He's been a guy who's able to play game after game after game and all the rest. So I've got two teams, John. Seattle as one, because I think that quarterback is showing his age, and he's gotten a little bit worse. He had a great year 2 years ago, an okay year this past year. Pete Carroll stepped away for a reason and maybe got pushed a little bit. But how about the Minnesota Vikings? How about Baker Mayfield coming to the Minnesota Vikings? They get rid of Kirk Cousins and his 40-some-odd million a year or whatever he's getting. And you look at a guy like Baker Mayfield and you go, you know what? We got receivers. We can get a quarterback on the cheap, whatever it is. Let's say it's $20 million. That's a cheap quarterback these days. So I think that would be a great landing spot if the Vikings are willing to say, Kirk, it's been great. You've been phenomenal. We can't pay you the money because I got to pay Danielle Hunter, who might be gone. I got to pay JJ. He's going to get the highest salary ever for a wide receiver. So Justin Jefferson. So what do you do? How do you do it? Well, Baker Mayfield might be somebody that you get for a 3-year contract where he's getting $20 million a year. What do you think?
Well, he's 28 years old, Pete. Yeah. So as opposed to like Geno Smith, the quarterback for the Seahawks that you were talking about, didn't have a bad year. Obviously had some great games this year, but he's not going to have Pete Carroll as his coach anymore. And I wouldn't be surprised if they did settle in on a guy like Baker Mayfield, because if you really like him, Pete, and he plays well for you, you could extend him from, like you said, a 3-year contract. You could extend him, another 3 or 4 years, and he's still going to be younger than Geno Smith, who's 33 or 34. Not that age means everything in the NFL, especially at quarterback. They don't take the same abuse that they took a decade ago or 2 decades ago. But, it's not an easy position. I was really impressed by Mayfield's ability, Pete, to go from Cleveland right over to Tampa Bay and pick up their system so quickly. So this is not a dumb guy. It's a hardworking guy, about 6'1", versus Geno Smith, of course, at 6'3" or 6'4". So slightly different, but nonetheless proved he can get it done, proved he can learn the offense in the off season. So I think you might be right. I'd say Seattle or the Vikings would be a great fit for Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, I think it'd be a lot of fun. By the way, when he left Cleveland, John, he also bounced around a lot of play. He went to L.A. for a moment or two. He went to Carolina for a moment or two. I mean, the guy has had to do a lot of different things, and he has been, to your point, smart enough to be able to swallow up that whole playbook and actually play as an NFL quarterback at a higher level. And it's what got him the opportunity, I think, in Tampa, and he took full advantage of it. So it'll be interesting. I guess it's a matter of, does he want to stay in Tampa, or does he want to kind of get out there and maybe get – because Tampa will pay him too. Somebody's going to pay him. It's just a matter of who's going to step up the biggest.
Yeah. And I suppose, Pete, just like Jefferson in Minnesota, if Evans stays, if they can hold on to him rather than losing him, then maybe they really do want to keep Baker Mayfield, because you need somebody to pitch him the ball.
Sure.
Well, thank you for joining us, folks. Remember, you can claim your free book if you go to itsnotanoption.com. That's itsnotanoption.com. You can claim your free book on that website. All you got to do is fill in your information and we'll send it out to you. You pay absolutely nothing for it. #1 trading book in 2024. So if you're somebody who wants to up your game a little bit and maybe start trading like Jon and Pete with options, by all means. This is our 4th book. So check it out at itsnotanoption.com. And we'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time.